The First Lady of the United States does not live with the president. And I have the court documents right here to prove it. This is not a rumor. This is not a gossip column. This is a federal court case that is unfolding right now, and the details inside these filings are so explosive, so jaw-dropping, that even the most seasoned legal experts are sitting back and asking one question. How did Melania Trump and her lawyers let this happen? Because here's the thing. Nobody forced Melania Trump into this situation. Nobody dragged her into court. She walked in herself. She loaded the gun, handed it to her opponents, and pulled the trigger with her own hand. And now she is standing in the middle of a federal courtroom, watching everything she tried to keep private become part of the public record forever. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the origin of this story is just as wild as where it is right now. Michael Wolff is a journalist, a veteran reporter who has spent decades covering the most powerful people in America. He wrote about Donald Trump. He wrote about the Trump inner circle. And at some point, he started talking publicly, on podcasts, in interviews, across multiple platforms, about Melania Trump's social life, her connections, and specifically her relationship to the Jeffrey Epstein network that surrounded Donald Trump. Now, most people in Melania's position would have ignored it. Most lawyers would have said, look, engaging with this publicly only makes it bigger. Let it die. Move on. The story fades in a week. But that is not what happened. Instead, Melania Trump's legal team sent Michael Wolff a letter, not just any letter, a $1 billion demand letter with a B, $1,000 million. They told him that his reporting was defamatory, that his statements were false, that he had damaged her reputation, and that unless he apologized and paid up, they were going to sue him into the ground. $1 billion. Now, stop and think about that for a second, because the moment you send a letter like that, you are not staying quiet anymore. You are not letting the story fade. You are pouring jet fuel on a fire and lighting a match while standing directly above it. You are telling the entire world, and every single journalist, lawyer, and court in America, this story is worth fighting over. That this story matters enough to threaten someone with $1 billion lawsuit. And Michael Wolff looked at that letter, handed it to his lawyers, and did something absolutely brilliant. He sued her first. Before Melania could file anything, before her team could choose the court, choose the judge, choose the jurisdiction, Wolff filed a lawsuit in New York State Supreme Court. He asked a judge to issue what is called a declaratory judgment. Essentially, he asked the court to officially declare that everything he reported was either true or protected under the First Amendment as legitimate journalism. He put the burden right back on Melania to prove that something he said was actually false. And now suddenly Melania is the defendant in New York, in a court she did not choose, in front of a process she did not control. So her team scrambles. They file what is called a notice of removal, which is a legal move to yank the case out of New York State court and push it into federal court. This is step one in a two-step strategy. Get it to federal court first, then try to get it transferred down to Florida, where the judges are more favorable, where the jurisdiction is easier to manage, and where there is at least a chance this case ends up in front of Judge Aileen Cannon, the same judge who has shown a remarkable amount of generosity toward matters involving Donald Trump. But here is the catch. To move a case to federal court based on what lawyers call diversity jurisdiction, you have to prove that the two parties in the lawsuit live in completely different states. Wolff lives in New York. So for this move to work, Melania's team has to argue, officially on the record in federal court filings, that Melania Trump is a Florida resident. She lives at Mar-a-Lago. She is domiciled in Palm Beach. She is not a New Yorker. And the moment they made that argument, Michael Wolff's legal team started smiling because they knew something. And now they were going to prove it. The federal judge assigned to this case is Judge Vokasil, who happens to be a Trump-appointed judge, one of very few in the Southern District of New York. But even she cannot simply take Melania's word for it. The law is very clear. If the opposing side presents what is called competent and colorable evidence that the person does not actually live where they claim, then the court must allow limited discovery on the question of residency. In other words, you have to let the other side investigate. You have to let them dig. And dig they did. What Wolff's legal team uncovered and then put into their court filing is now permanently part of the public record. And it paints a picture that is absolutely devastating to Melania's claim that she is a Florida resident. Let's start with the apartment. Everyone knows about the Trump Tower penthouse, the 66-floor triplex, the gold and marble monument to excess that became famous during the Trump presidency and even more famous during the New York fraud trial. That is the family apartment. That is where Donald Trump's name is on the deed. But tucked inside the same building, on the 33rd floor, is a completely separate apartment, Unit 33H. And this apartment does not belong to Donald Trump. It belongs to Melania Trump. Purchased in 2016, held through her own limited liability company called 721. 33 Holdings LLC, registered and active in New York, with her name attached and Donald Trump's name nowhere to be found. She bought her own apartment in the same building as her husband, on a different floor, through her own company. Let that sink in. This is not a guest suite. This is not overflow space for visitors. This is a separately owned, privately held apartment that Melania Trump has maintained independently since 2016. And her legal opponents found it, documented it, and put it directly into a federal court filing. But the apartment is just the beginning. Because when you look at every single person in Melania Trump's personal and professional life, what you find is not Florida. What you find is New York, over and over and over again, in a pattern so consistent that it is almost impossible to argue against. Her hairstylist is in New York. Her makeup artist is in New York. Her manicurist is in New York. Her dentist is in New York. Her personal doctors are in New York. Her financial advisors are in New York. Her interior decorator, the same one who appears in the official Melania Trump documentary, is in New York. Her event planner is in New York. Her publisher, the company that released her book, is in New York. Her senior advisors, identified by name in the documentary, live in New York. Her personal assistants are employed by the Trump Organization and work out of New York. Her immigration lawyer, the attorney who not only handled Melania's own immigration matters, but also managed the paperwork that brought her parents to the United States, practices in New York. Her father lives in New York City. Her sister lives on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And her son, Barron, the child she has repeatedly said is her highest priority in life, the person she has organized her entire schedule around, the reason she stayed in New York for months after Donald Trump was first inaugurated. Barron Trump is an undergraduate student at New York University, living in New York City. Every anchor point in this woman's life points to the same city, the same state, the same answer. And then there is what came out of Melania's own mouth. In 2024, she posted publicly on social media and wrote, and I want you to hear these exact words: "New York City has captivated my heart from the moment I arrived." Her words, posted publicly, voluntarily, to the entire world. And then came Madison Square Garden, standing on one of the most famous stages in the world, in front of a massive crowd, with cameras broadcasting to every corner of the country. Melania Trump stepped to the microphone and said, "Good evening, New York City. Hello, Madison Square Garden, our hometown, our hometown. Not a place she used to live, not a city she visits occasionally, our hometown." Now, her lawyers are in federal court trying to convince a judge that she is actually a Florida resident. On the other side has video of her calling New York her hometown, posted publicly just months before this lawsuit began. This is what lawyers call a gift. And Michael Wolff's team received it with both hands. There is also something worth paying attention to in the actual language of the court filing that Wolff's team submitted. They note that anytime Melania Trump appears in Florida, in Washington, D.C., overseas, or anywhere outside of New York, it is in her capacity as First Lady or as a candidate's spouse. It is professional. It is performative. It is for appearances. Her real life, the private, personal, day-to-day existence of Melania Trump, is anchored in New York. And the court filing argues that the Florida residency claim is not just inaccurate. It is an artifice. A legal fiction constructed specifically to try to manipulate the jurisdiction of this case and route it toward more favorable courts. There is a line in the filing that is going to stay with anyone who reads it. Talking about Melania's focus on her son, the document notes that she is especially devoted to Barron in circumstances where Donald Trump is, and this is the exact phrasing used, more occupied elsewhere with other matters. More occupied elsewhere with other matters. That is the language Wolff's legal team chose to describe the situation. And it speaks volumes without saying a single explicit word. Because everyone reading that understands what it means. It is not just about a busy schedule. It is about a marriage that exists on paper and in public appearances and almost nowhere else. Two people, one famous tower, different floors, different lives. And now a federal judge has to sort through all of it. What happens next is that Judge Vocasol must decide whether to grant the limited discovery that Wolff's team is requesting. If she allows it, Melania will potentially be required to sit for a deposition, to answer questions under oath, to produce documents, records, phone logs, travel histories, to explain on the record and with legal consequences for lying exactly where she lives and how she lives and what her life actually looks like behind the walls of Trump Tower. And remember, this entire situation exists because Melania Trump sent $1 billion demand letter. She could have said nothing. She could have let the Wolff reporting fade into the background noise of a political media cycle that moves on to the next story within days. She could have maintained the carefully constructed image of the elegant, private, dignified First Lady who rises above the chaos. Instead, she picked a fight with a journalist who spent years inside the Trump world, who knows where the bodies are buried, who has sources at every level of that operation, and who is now being handed the legal authority to ask Melania Trump questions she has spent years avoiding. The questions about her apartment, about her marriage, about how she actually lives, about what her daily existence looks like, about the gap between the official story and the real one. And here is what makes this legally fascinating. The burden of proof in this residency dispute is on Melania. She's the one who made the claim. She's the one who filed the removal notice asserting Florida residency. So she's the one who has to prove it. She has to come forward with evidence strong enough to overcome everything that Wolff's team has already put on the record: the apartment, the family, the doctors, the stylists, the advisors, the social media posts, the Madison Square Garden speech. She has to explain all of that away. And she has to do it convincingly enough to satisfy a federal judge. If she fails, if the judge finds that she has not established Florida residency, the case gets sent back to New York State Court, which means Wolff gets exactly the venue he wanted, which means Melania's billion-dollar demand letter ends up achieving the exact opposite of what it was intended to do. Instead of silencing a journalist and burying the story, it created a federal court record that is now forced into public view details about her living arrangements, her marriage, and her private life that she has spent years protecting, all because someone decided to send that letter. The lesson here is one that any lawyer will tell you on day one of understanding litigation strategy. Before you pull the trigger on a high-stakes lawsuit, especially one involving a public figure with complicated personal circumstances, you need to ask yourself one very important question. What happens if they fight back? Because Michael Wolff fought back, and now we know about Unit 33H. We know about the LLC. We know about the 33rd floor. We know about the hairstylists and the doctors and the dentists and the advisors, all of them in New York, all of them documented, all of them now part of a permanent court record. And we know that when Melania Trump stood on a stage and spoke to the world, she called New York City her hometown. The case continues. The discovery battle is just beginning, and every single development is going to play out in public filings that anyone can read. This story is not going away. In fact, thanks to that billion-dollar letter, it is just getting started. Stay locked in, because this is only going to get bigger from here.